I would like to welcome you to the workshop series titled Handling Money God's Way. The presenter, Tom Copland, is a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ who has been called to teach God's Word on finances since 1982. Tom has helped thousands of people learn and apply God's financial principles. Tom is the founder and president of Copland Financial Ministries, and his financial moments are aired on numerous radio and TV stations. Now, here's Tom teaching Handling Money God's Way.
In the following video, I will explain some of the benefits of saving for your next automobile rather than borrowing and buying. Among other things, when people consistently borrow and buy, it means they will always have a car loan payment, and if they are ever out of a job or have some other unusual expenditures, they will likely experience significant financial stress because of the ongoing car loan payments. Further, when you pay cash for a car, generally you can get a lower price. Please note that the calculations provided in this video were done several years ago when interest rates were higher. And even though interest rates in this video that I use, those examples, may not be current rates for when you watch this video, please understand that the financial principles are still the same. They're exactly the same. Namely, the individual who follows the biblical guideline of planning ahead, Proverbs 21:20, and saving for their next automobile as opposed to always borrowing and buying, they will end up better off in the long run and have less financial stress. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty." Let's go saving versus borrowing, car loans. Here's an example I use, Mr. Borrower and Mr. Saver. They both buy a new car and it costs $30,000 all inclusive. That's including taxes. They do it every 5 years. Now, it's not necessary to trade your car in every 5 years, but I'm just trying to show here the benefit of saving for cars versus borrowing and buying. Mr. Saver purposely spends less than what he makes and sets aside sufficient funds every month in order to save for his cars. The borrower, on the other hand, does the opposite. He just borrows and buys. So here's what happens on the car loans. Both buy new cars. Now, what I'm giving you here on the slide is the summary. If you want to see the detailed calculations, they're in your handout. And by the way, the principle here applies regardless of what interest rates you use. We know always you're going to earn less money at the bank on a GIC or a savings account or even in a bond fund than what the bank charges you, because the bank always has their spread. So the cost to borrow is I've never seen it where the cost to borrow is less than what you can make on a safe investment. I mean, it just doesn't exist. And so even if the rates that some might say, well, see, the rates jump around, and the rates can be different is what I'm saying, but the principle's the same. The person who saves for their car and buys versus the person who borrows and buys, the person who saves pays a whole lot less. So if you look over a period of 5 years, the same car costs Mr. Borrower $8,673 more. That's 32% more than the saver. And it shows you the calculation there. The reason is because the saver has compound interest working for them. They basically, as they put their money aside each month, they don't have to save the full $30,000. They only have to save, in this case, $26,969. The borrower, on the other hand, not only pays the $30,000, but they have to pay the interest, which in this case is $5,642, and the difference between those is $8,673. So let's say they make it a lifestyle. They do it on a regular basis. And they do it during their lifetime, and let's say they're driving cars for 50 years. That means the total cost would be $86,730 more to the borrower than to the saver. And what's always amazing about this, I find, is that the saver drove a car of the exact same value as the borrower, except the first 5 years when Mr. Saver drove a used car and had no debt. That's how the saver basically got it. The first 5 years he drives a used car, has no debt, and he saves for his first new car. But out of the 50 years, for 45 years, they're driving the same car. Now, the question I get most common here, wait a second, but there's 0% financing. The thing is, we know there's free lunches. There are no free lunches, right? Sorry, there's no free lunches. You know, the auto dealerships and the auto manufacturers are not charitable organizations that are giving stuff away. The cost of the financing is built into the car. So if you're getting 0% financing, it's built into the car. I know GM just recently, actually it was several months ago when I checked it out, they had tremendous discounts for people that were willing to pay cash. They were really significant. Some of them were as high as $7,000. and a number of cars were like $4,000 or $5,000. And even most cars, if you ask for a discount, you can usually get it. Now I know there's the odd exception. I've seen the odd exception, but there is a cost built in for financing. What's also interesting, I have some clients in various business. They tell me that they can make as much on the financing that the dealership can, some of them, as they do on selling the car. It's quite interesting. They make significant commissions on the financing as well. Actually, that's more for, my apologies, that's not on cars, that's more for Sea-Doos, Ski-Doos, ATVs, and those kinds of things. Actually, I know one client, he makes more on the financing on the Sea-Doos, Ski-Doos, and the ATVs than they do. But we know there's no free lunches, right? And so the cost is built into the car. And most of the time when you go to a dealership and you're willing to pay cash, you can get a better deal. So, now what about new car versus used car? Being an accountant and also we do auditing, I got my numbers from a friend of mine named Scott who's in the used car business. He buys and sells cars. So, because I wanted to make sure it was fairly objective. Here's the examples. Mr. New Car acquires a new car every 3 years. He does what a lot of people do. Trades his car in and gets a new car every 3 years. The cost is $30,000, which by the way is about $26,500 for the car plus taxes. It comes to $30,000. He sells it in 3 years for $10,000. Mr. Used Car, on the other hand, he purchases a 3-year-old car. He buys Mr. New Car's car at a cost of $10,000 and he pays taxes. His total cost is $11,300. He keeps each automobile for 6 years. He takes it up to 9 years, and he sells it for $2,000. Now, every once in a while, some people get concerned. Well, what if you can't get $2,000? If you give it away, you're still a whole lot better off, even if you drive it to the junkyard or you just give it away. The $2,000 is not significant. What you're going to see as significant is the depreciation that Mr. New Car incurs because he's trading his cars in every 3 years. Because he's incurring, what's the difference? 30 minus 10 is $20,000. You divide that over 3 years. It's $6,666 as shown on the second line there. And so he's incurring $6,600 of depreciation every year. And again, let's say he makes it a lifestyle. He trades his car in every 3 years, buys a new car, which lots of people do. He ends up incurring depreciation over those years of $333,000. The used car, on the other hand, he's only incurring depreciation of $1,550. And if he does that over 50 years, that's $77,500. The difference in the depreciation is over $250,000, $255,833. Now let's assume that Mr. Used Car incurs $1,000 more per year in repairs than the guy buying the new car, $1,000. So he's got $50,000 in repairs to work with over his lifetime. Now that's $1,000 more, okay? So even in the 6 years, he's got $6,000 to work with. Let's suppose that. He's still better off by $205,000. It's huge. The differences are huge. I've seen this as an accountant for years and years and years. I've actually shown it to a number of my clients. Like I say, some of them, most of them, I usually convince them to buy a car about 3 years old. Because you know the old saying, you drive a car off the lot, you lose $5,000 to $10,000. It's absolutely true. And the biggest depreciation's in the first 3 years. I'm an accountant, and I have found, I always have a mechanic, sometimes two mechanics, that are honest, that I trust. And so when I go and look at a used car, I know nothing about cars, I get a mechanic I trust to check it out, who's also independent, that's not selling me a car. I've been buying used cars for 40 years. I've only had one bad deal. I bought it from a mechanic and I didn't get it checked out. It was his car. I just trusted the guy, and I shouldn't have. And I thought, I don't need to do that. He's a mechanic. And but it really does pay off. Like I said, my friend Scott confirmed this for me. So you've even got the extra money for the repairs. What I haven't factored in is a used car typically has a lower cost for insurance as well. The collision is less, and even the insurance premium is generally less. That's another bonus. And I'm going to show you the last comparison here. Let's suppose you borrow and buy a new car, which Mr. New Car was doing in the first example, as opposed to saving and buying a used car. So you're not only going to buy a used car every 3 years, but you save for it. So let's suppose that Mr. New Car borrows and buys a new automobile, and Mr. Used Car saves for his used automobiles. Here's again, the detailed calculations are in your handout, but here's the difference. Basically, the person who saves and buys the used car is $255,000 better off. $205,000 roughly on the depreciation, and the interest, what happens, the difference there is almost $50,000, because the person saving is accumulating $11,000 in interest, He's basically, he's saving his money so he doesn't have to save as much when he goes to buy his car, right? But the person with the new car, they're paying interest. And that's the difference between having compound interest working for you versus against you. It's $250,000. You can push these numbers as much as you want. The differences are significant. And you can get different cars. I know you can get cars, some may not to depreciate quite as fast. It's still significant. It's still very, very significant. The person that has the patience, that'll buy the used car and also buy it and drive it for a number of years. So I just say here at the bottom, well, it makes a whole lot of sense to save in advance and buy a used car. Now, I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not saying it's wrong to buy a new car. I would say this, if you're going to buy a new car, plan to keep it for 10 years. Unless you're putting on, 40,000 miles a year or something, or 50,000 miles a year. But plan to keep it until it's worn out. So if you do buy a new one, plan to keep it a long time till it's worn out. But it's even, now if you did those numbers, they'd come in between. Someone who, bought a new car every 10 years, they sort of come in between. It's still cheaper to buy the used car, 3 years old. Because the person buying the 3-year-old car roughly, they're buying it at a significantly discounted price over the new one. So that's just some practical advice. And I've just seen so many calculations, and I just know that the concepts there, the numbers can vary slightly. So any questions on that, buying used car versus new car?
Tom, how do we get there from here?
Good. You mean like you have a debt on your current car?
Most of us, I'm sure, are in debt somewhat
right.
now. We're trying to get ourselves out of debt from what we've learned for the last 4 weeks. But also, some of us have lease payments, car payments, and to be able to save on top of that would make it very, very difficult, especially when you're trying to get yourself out of debt. So do you have any ideas as to how to start and get moving towards that?
Good question. I would say this. First of all, if you're in a lot of debt, and especially if you got expensive debt like credit card debt, and you can't refinance it, you got to focus on that. You may not actually be able to save for these things right away. The reason I give it as an example, because there's still lots of people, even though they're in debt, will do the new car thing regardless, thinking that they have to do it. So I try to at least let them say, okay, if your car is worn out and you got to get another car, at least get a used car. And if you really don't have any money and you absolutely have to borrow, at least borrow a used one. At least you can do it a lot cheaper. Some of these things are goals you have to work to. You may not be able to do this tomorrow or the next month or the next year, but hopefully within 3 to 5 years you could be doing this. That's the goal. That's why I bring this in session 4. Questions to consider before borrowing and these things to consider, because you want to be there eventually. Because one of the things I like to see is when we help people reduce their debt and get out of debt is that they don't go back into it because the temptation is there. Thanks for that question.
I want to ask you a question. A friend of mine's van, her transmission on it is gone, but the rest of the van, it looks great. There's no rust or anything on it. She was looking around for another car, and she could get one for like $5,000 used. But I don't know, like when would you draw the line into fixing it? Like when the expense is like the engine or the transmission?
Yeah, if it becomes major, that's an excellent question. What I would do there is, first of all, consult with a mechanic and say, okay, is this the only major problem to the best of his knowledge or her knowledge and belief that you're going to have in the next few years? And if they might look at it and say, well, listen, your engine's burning oil and it's not going to be long, that's going to go, and then that car goes to the wreckers, right? If it looks like it's going to last a long time, and this is just one unique problem, and it's going to cost $1,500 to get it fixed, it may be worth it to get it fixed. And of course, in all of these, there's no substitute for praying and asking God, because He knows the future. We don't know the future. He does. He knows if that car is going to have lots of repairs in the next 3 or 4 years. So ask Him, and ask Him to guide and direct you as to what you should do. But I know that those become tough decisions. That's where we need the direction of the Lord. That's why, we got biblical principles that give us guidelines, but there's no substitute for a close personal relationship with Jesus Christ and allowing the Lord to guide and direct you according to His will. Because He knows the future, we don't. Thanks for that question. I think there's one at the back.
I have a comment on savings versus borrowing. You're dealing with the car. You give the scenario of Mr. Borrower and Mr. Saver. The comment is that Mr. Saver might want the instant gratification of having that new car. He wants to smell the new leather and things like that. So that's why he might just go and buy his new car.
That's true.
We come here also to new car versus old car. Have you used car? Have you worked at anything in terms of lease also?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question, because a lot of business people would tend to lease their car. Lease is just another means of financing. So what you got to do with the lease is find out what is the inherent interest cost in the lease. What is it? And often it's hidden, okay? But you need that can be calculated if you have the proper software. Just comparing the cash, what would we be required to pay for it cash versus the lease payments, that can be calculated. But leasing is, again, just another form of financing. It really is just another form of borrowing, because you have a commitment to make a number of payments over a period of time. So again, I wouldn't lease unless you have to, because it's just another form of financing. So you just have to have a close look at it. So again, buying the used car is generally the better way to do it. By the way, one of the greatest places to get used cars is cars coming off lease. My friend tells me there's over 2,000 GM, Ford, and Chryslers coming off lease every week in Mississauga, every week. So right now, now that's probably going to fade out because those companies are getting out of the lease business. But there's a lot of them available out there, quite a few. Any other questions? I think there was another one. Yeah.
I told you earlier, before I took your course, I'm glad I bought a used van, because I teach internationals, right? I drive 6 students to Algonquin and whatever. So I got rid of my Previa, which I bought in 1991, so 18 years old. I had $360,000. I took it to the junkyard, and they gave me $79. Plus, I took my new battery. They gave me my new battery. So I got...
Good for you.
So I went to, there's a lot of used car shops across York University, and I got, including taxes, I got Sienna, 2002, so 7 years old, for $9,975, including taxes. And it runs like, Toyota lasts long, okay, and you really get your money's worth. I don't work for Toyota, but because of my ministry, it's important for me to have a van and a trustworthy van.
And how much would that vehicle be brand new?
Oh, 30, 40,000.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you bought it a lot less. Yeah,
no.
yeah.
Don't buy new car.
Or if you do, keep it for a long time. There's one up here.
I have a question on, I bought a car about maybe like 10 years back, and I bought it for like $7,000. I actually put in $7,000 into the car to keep it running for about 6 years. So would that be, like, basically how you judge if it's a smart move versus...
Well, if you let's add up the numbers. You paid $7,000?
Paid $7,000
and you paid $7,000 in repairs?
Yeah.
$14,000. How long did you have it for?
Back 6 years.
6 years, okay.
Back then, a brand new Cavalier was $12,000.
Yeah, so your cost is a little over $2,000 per year if you add in repairs and maintenance. Sorry, repairs and depreciation. That's still a whole lot less than if you buy the new car. Because with the new car, your depreciation in this example is $6,700 a year. So it's still quite a bit less. That's why so often you save so much on the depreciation that you have significant extra money for repairs if it's needed. But there is a point where you got to make a judgment call, especially if the tranny is going and you go to a mechanic and the engine doesn't look that good. Those are pretty major things. Maybe it's time to send it to the junkyard. Thanks. Okay, here I'm going to give an example of saving versus borrowing on mortgages. Now, in this example, both Mr. Borrow and Mr. Saver, they both borrow money in this case. But the difference between the saver and the borrower here, the saver sets aside an extra, they budget carefully and set aside an extra $400 a month so that they're making a payment of $1,548 a month on their mortgage instead of $1,148. $1,148 is just the regular payment that's required over 30 years on this example of a $200,000 mortgage. So there you can see the summary. The total payments that the borrower would pay over 30 years is $413,000. Mr. Saver, on the other hand, with just paying an extra $400 a month, is going to only pay that mortgage for just over 16 and a half years and pay approximately $307,000 in total payments. The savings for the person that put aside just an extra $400 a month, applied it against their mortgage, is about $106,000 over the term. It's huge. And 13 and a half years almost of loan payments. It's very significant. It's absolutely huge. So what I find in my experience, not only has the art of saving been lost, but also for most people, it never even occurs to them. They don't even think about it. See, so many people, I mean, the mindset's buy now, pay later. So many people, when they have a mortgage, they think, well, you just pay it as requested. Now, that's a 30-year mortgage. At one point, we had 40-year mortgages. I understand that's been reduced to 35 as a max now. But just freeing up that $400 a month, say $100 a week, makes a huge, huge difference. So whenever you negotiate, by the way, whenever you take on your mortgage, negotiate terms that allows flexibility in terms of paying it down quickly so you don't incur penalties. What you don't want to incur is the 3-month penalty to pay it off quickly or something like that. That's very punitive. But negotiate terms that gives you flexibility. There's lots of different things that the banks operate out there. Sometimes you can double your payment if you want to. Other times they allow you to pay as much as 20% of the principal down each year. Just get some flexibility and then try to do it. Try to pay it on a regular basis. So, any comments on that, on mortgages?
Fast is good, isn't it, Tom?
Pardon me?
Fast is good. Faster is better.
Oh, to pay it down faster?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Two comments, actually, if I can take a bit of your time.
Sure.
I had a friend of mine, a real estate agent, call me with a potential property, and he was going on about how easy it would be to carry this thing if you mortgaged it over 30 years. If you
Yeah, I know.
And I just kind of cut him off there. I had heard enough, right? But I wanted to share a personal example also. My wife and I bought our home in 1998 with our mortgage. We put down 25%, and we had a 17-year amortization when we bought it.
Excellent.
We had a few good years and put some lump sum payments down. Like there was a couple of years we put about $5,000 down at the end of the year.
Oh, great.
We're less than a year away from paying it off.
Oh, praise God.
I'm not looking for praise or anything like that. It's praise the Lord, exactly.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And it really does make a difference to just keep on hammering away at the thing and give her.
Are you going to be sad when you don't have to make those mortgage payments anymore?
Not at all.
Excellent. I think someone talked about something. Is it a good time to fix in your rate? Rates are very, very low. Okay, rates are very, very low right now, extremely low. Where rates are going to go, the truth is nobody knows. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what they'll bring forth. Realistically, they can't go any lower. Or if they go lower, they can't go much lower. If you look at the range of mortgage rates in the last 40 years, we're at the very, very bottom of the range. Bank of Canada rates 1/4%. It can't go any lower. It just can't. And so the odds are high. If anything, it's going to go up. Now, how fast it'll go up and how quickly, nobody knows. Only the Lord knows. And that's one of those decisions where you got to pray and ask God, what should you do? Because right now, from what I understand, an open mortgage is like 2.5%. A fixed-year 5 mortgage is about 4.25%. If you fix it in for 5 years, the great thing is you're fixed in at 4% or 4.25%. Now, if rates stay the same, or if they go up just a little, you're going to be worse off because you fixed it in at a higher rate. But if you fix it in at say 4% and rates go up a lot in the next few years, you're going to look like a genius and feel good. But the only one that knows that is the Lord. God can personally direct you as to what you should do. And also if you're paying it down quickly, like one of the other things is, as the rates come down, how many people would actually, keep their mortgage payment the same so they're paying more principal? A lot of people don't do that. The rates come down and the mortgage payment goes down. They often lower the mortgage payment and they spend the money somewhere else. But pray and ask the good Lord to guide and direct you. All right, I want to talk about co-signing. God's Word strongly advises against co-signing. The terminology used for co-signing in the book of Proverbs is to strike hands and pledge. Striking hands and pledge literally means to strike hands, shaking hands, pledging that you're responsible for a financial obligation. And in the time that the Proverbs was written, they didn't have great big long legal documents like we have today that are 30 or 40 pages. A handshake was sufficient, and they usually would have one or two witnesses, and then you had a handshake where somebody made an agreement that they'd be responsible for a financial obligation. And that was the term used for co-signing. That meant that you were responsible for that financial obligation when you struck hands in pledge. Proverbs 22:26 says, Do not be a man who strikes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched out from under you. In other words, something very important will be taken from you. It's on co-signing, it's not a sin to co-sign, because sometimes I hear people, because often, dad will co-sign for the son, or brother will co-sign for a sister. It's not a sin to co-sign. It's a principle, it's not a law. But God warns that if you do co-sign, you may suffer some negative consequences. Proverbs 17:18 says, A man lacking in judgment strikes hands in pledge and puts up security for his neighbor. So it's clear. I think I was teaching on this at a church once, and a lady came up to me afterwards, and I've heard lots of these, but this one was particularly sad because several years ago, when her and her husband went to another church, they had worked really hard, and by age 50, early 50s, they were totally debt-free. They had no debt, no mortgage, nothing. A leader in their church, actually an elder in their church, asked them to come and co-sign a debt of his company, and it was for a few $100,000. It was a big number. And he explained, it wasn't a big deal. It's just a formality. You just sign this, and it just helps get me over this hump, and you don't have to worry about anything. Well, several months later, this fellow's company went under, and what happened? The bank came, and they had to do good on the co-sign, and basically they ended up with a huge mortgage on their house that was otherwise debt-free. And that was an elder in their church. And what I find is most of God's people don't have any idea that the Bible warns against co-signing. It warns against it. I see so many cases where brother signs on behalf of brother. See, often the co-signer doesn't think they're going to have to pay the debt. It's just a formality. The reality is the bank's asking you to co-sign because they don't believe that the lender, the original lender, is creditworthy. That's why they're asking for the co-signer. So often the co-signer has to pay a debt. And so often what happens is not only does the co-signer end up with a liability and a debt they have to pay they didn't expect, but usually the relationship gets soured. The relationship gets tainted because of it. Brother and brother aren't talking to each other anymore.
If you would like to learn more about handling money God's way, be sure to check out the numerous resources available at CoplandFinancialMinistries.org. Again, CoplandFinancialMinistries.org. Or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter under Bible Finance.